All right, so about a week ago on a video I posted on Thanksgiving, I had asked at the end of the video for some questions and comments in the comment section from all of you of things you want me to go over briefly or to address for you in an upcoming video. So that is what we're going to do today. Here we go. Hi everyone, my name is Wade Thomas. I'm the owner of Black Tie Barn Candle Company and this YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to helping others with candle making, the business side of candle making, as well as other related content as well. So hopefully you enjoy this video and other videos on the channel. If you're not already a subscriber, I would encourage you to do so and click the bell for future videos so you don't miss anything when it is posted. For everyone else, thank you for being here as always, and I appreciate all you current subscribers. So let's go ahead and dive into today's video. Today we're going to be addressing some of the questions that I did get on the video I posted on Thanksgiving. I was just kind of going through several comments and questions, and we're going to address each of those very briefly today. We're not going to go really in depth into each one of those because each question could be a topic for itself, a video all for itself. But I did want to at least give a quick kind of recap summary and answer the questions briefly but effectively for you. So hopefully my answers can help some of you out. And again, I'm not an expert by any means on everything candle making. So there are going to be questions that I might not be able to assist with. And if that's the case, I'll be honest with you, just to let you know that. But the ones that I feel like I might be able to add some value and help others out, I will do my best. So here we go. So I'm going to pull these questions up. I'm just kind of doing this on the fly, so, hopefully this goes fairly smoothly. But so this question is from No Limit. Says, thank you for posting this video. My question would be, how do you prevent huge wet spots on container jars when using paraffin wax? Well, wet spots can be an issue with any wax, but it is more common with wax that shrink and contract. So paraffin and parasoils do it more than something like a coconut wax or a very soft soy wax. But the question is specifically how to prevent it using paraffin wax. So I will answer that specifically, but just know that some of these things can also help with other waxes that are experiencing wet spots as well. My first thing I would say though is that I wouldn't concern yourself too much with wet spots. I know they look unappealing and they bother us, but they don't bother most customers. In fact, most customers don't care and they're already used to it. If you go to a store and look on the shelf, most candles have wet spots. Now, you might not notice them because they're in containers that you can't see them. But if you look at most of the clear jars from your common candle makers, they're going to have wet spots. And wet spots happen because as the wax heats and shrinks, it's going to pull away from the glass, and there's nothing you can really do about it long term. And so that's going to be the first answer to that. There are tips that I'll mention here real quickly that can help you control wet spots early on. But the sad truth is you can't control it forever. Once they leave you and they're no longer sitting with you on your shelves and they're sitting at shelves somewhere else or in people's homes, that ambient temperature around there is can cause these wet spots to return. So there's nothing you can do about it long term. But what can you do about it early on? Well, there's a couple things. Again, wax shrinks as it cools. So one option you have is to try to prevent it from shrinking as much. One way of doing that is to try pouring a little bit cooler. You could preheat your jars so that it slows down the cool, and then you pour your wax cooler so it has less room to contract and less chance for wet spots. That's not a favorite method of mine because I want things to be scalable. And so that's not really what I would recommend, but it is an option for you to try, especially if you're making small batches. Another thing you could try is just changing your recipe a little bit. So if you have a wax that has a tendency to shrink too much beyond your liking, you could add some coconut wax, some coconut oil. You can add some lower melt point, softer soy waxes, basically adjusting your blend a little bit to try to make it a softer wax. Certain things you add to your wax can actually make wet spots worse. For example, Vybar. Vybar has a lot of good benefits. One of the characteristics of Vybar is that it's a hardener for your wax. And when you harden your wax, it's going to not adhere to the walls of the candle jar as well as the wax would on its own. So just be aware that if you're using Vybar, you might have more wet spots than you're used to. And that's also why most of your paraffin waxes do have a lot of wet spot issues, is because they already contract on their own, and then Vybar is usually added to paraffin waxes, and that will cause further contraction. So I would try less Vybar if you're using that. And again, these are suggestions if you're concerned about wet spots. Just be aware that if you do some of these things, you might have other issues to deal with, but you could lower the little Vybar usage. You could use a softer wax or blend any softer wax. You could preheat your jars, and you could change your pour temp. Now, I mentioned first that you could lower your pour temp and preheat your jars, and that's to prevent the wax from shrinking. Another option, though, is to pour hotter. Now, you're going to deal with other issues like sinkholes and things like that, but you could pour hotter and that will help it with jar adhesion. So it's a double-edged sword. If you help one thing, you're going to hurt something else. So my general advice is don't worry about wet spots so much. But if they really bother you, you're going to want to go with a really soft container wax. That's going to be your best bet. The next question I have here is, some of these are just some kind feedback. They're not really questions. Let's see. Another one real quick that I'll address is, as a topic that I would love to get covered and I haven't seen anywhere else, is a video on the issue of flames causing soot marks directly on the wax surface, particularly from wood wicks. So what they're referring to here is when you have a wood wick candle and you're burning the wood wick, you get some of that black residue on the wax and it actually changes and kind of stains the wax, so to speak. Unfortunately, that is just a characteristic of wood wicks. They're kind of ash onto the wax. It's like, it's the soot you get when you're having a campfire or a bonfire or something like that. When wood burns, it's going to kind of leave deposits on the wax. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. Some oils and some waxes don't do it as badly, but it's kind of one of the things about using a wood wick. If you want to use wood wicks, you're just going to have to accept that there's going to be more black deposits into the wax. Now, it's not bad. It's not something harmful, but I mean, it is burning, and wood, you're burning a piece of wood, and so you are going to get some residue on the top of the wax. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. Certain colors show the black worse than others. Certain waxes, again, don't do it as bad either. But honestly, there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. I know that's not the greatest answer. One thing I'd suggest is just experiment with different waxes and oils and see if there's anything that you find to help. For example, I have a lot of wood wick candles. Some do it and others don't. And to me, it's a combination of the wax and the oil and the wick itself. I would say the ones that you're going to have better luck with are the wood wicks that you've sized so perfectly that they're almost self-extinguishing and they're just kind of burning away as they go, and they don't leave as many deposits into the wax itself. So hopefully that helps a little bit. It's kind of a hard one to answer because it's just the nature of using wood wicks. Let's go to the next one. So I got a couple questions, again, with more interest about how I price candles. I'm going to leave that not in this video because that's too long of a conversation. So I'm going to save those, but I promise I have more pricing videos coming. Got a question from Marlene Lopez. Just says, any bloopers? I can't be the only one. So yes, I haven't really had any in making a video yet, although, you know, if I have one, I won't cut it out. I'll leave it in there just for fun. But I have had bloopers of my own when making candles. The worst one that I can think of is in my old workshop. I had melting pots along the top, and I was changing them around because I was changing waxes that I was using for a particular batch. And I forgot, I knew it was unplugged and I wasn't using it, but I forgot it was still liquid, that it wasn't actually cooled back and solid yet. And so I just went really quickly to grab it to get it out of the way. And I just wasn't thinking, and I grabbed it and just went like this, and the wax literally flew all over me. I was completely covered head to toe. It was all over the floor, but I was drenched in it. I mean, you could have stuck a wick on me, lit me up, and I would have burned for a month. It was bad. I looked like a walking candlestick. But I had wax all over me and all over the floor. And at the time, it was concrete floors. I didn't have any flooring down or tile or anything like that. And if anyone has spilled wax on concrete floors, it's really hard to get up because the concrete, it cools very quickly, the concrete. And you think, oh, that's a good thing. You can just scrape it off, which you can. But then it leaves that sticky, oily residue. And the only way to get it off is kind of heat it and dry it up. But it cools so quickly on concrete that when you heat it, it's really hard to get out of concrete. So it was a bad deal, but that's the biggest, I guess, blooper that comes to mind right off the top of my head. I know there's more. If I think of more, I'll share them. Let's see here. So Leslie Leo had asked about liquid dyes. You know, do I prefer liquid versus blocks or chips, and where do I get mine? Now, we've talked offline. Actually, we did a Zoom call recently, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We talked about this directly, but I will just for others. I prefer liquid dyes, not because they're necessarily better than dyed chips, but they are a lot easier to control the amount you're using and to get specific, exact, repetitive processes every time, because drops are easier to count than, you know, chipping or scraping off little chips. Now, if you're making larger batches, you can use chips and dye blocks because you can weigh them. But typically, if you're just making your average kind of batch for, you know, regular candle makers, just liquid dyes are just the way to go. So my advice would be to make sure you buy them from a reputable candle company. Buy them from the big suppliers, just because you know that they're going to be reliable and they're concentrated and they're legitimate. I know Leslie had mentioned she bought some from just a couple, you know, kind of podunk candle supply companies. I mean, they're legit companies, but they're not kind of big ones. And she was very disappointed with the quality of them. And so I would just stick to the companies you trust, and you won't really have any problems. I had another question from Courtney Foster about choosing the best wick and FO combo. So, you know, she gives a couple examples that she sees different processes and explanations of how to go about testing wicks. And I'm going to do a testing video on how I go about my testing processes here soon. But to try to give a little bit of an answer here, I have a video, and I'll link it up above, that's about baselining your wax. I mean, if you haven't watched that yet, check that out. It's a process that I use on any new wax that I'm using. And then I also use it when I buy new lots of waxes. And I'm not going to go into the details of how to baseline the wax. That video can explain it to you. But the reason I bring it up is that usually gives me an idea of where to start with my wick. And so when I'm going to do new testing on a new fragrance, I at least know a decent range of wicks that I'm going to start with. And I usually know what type or two to try, as well as 3 sizes of each maybe. So I usually do about 6 to 8 testers right from the get-go. And so that is kind of where I start. And if none of those work, then something's very different or very off about this. And so I either will adjust, I'll just keep experimenting, adjusting until I find it, or I don't deal with it. You want to keep your processes as streamlined as possible. And if you're having to do a lot of crazy things and outliers for specific situations, then it's usually not worth the time to do that. But to each their own, everyone is going to have a different perspective on that. But for example, Courtney asked, how do you know an HTP 104 is better than a 5, and so on? And it's really about testing. And so I will baseline my wax and figure out what wicks I find most of the time work well, and I use those as my starting points, and then I just adjust up and down. Now, I know she's wanting a lot more of an in-depth answer than that, and so I'll address that in my testing video and explain how I go about wicking. I also have a wick video that I think most of you have probably already seen, but it's a really in-depth, fairly long video. Just heads up, it's like a short movie. But I do go into a lot of details about that and how to think about wicking. And so that'll help answer some of these questions as well. But lastly, she asked, how does the wick get clogged when there's too much fragrance? And again, that wick video covers that question, actually. I use kind of a milkshake analogy, which is kind of funny. So if you haven't checked it out, it gives some other examples of why that happens. But different wicks are formulated different ways, and different sizes are basically like a straw. And if you're trying to feed too much food up a straw or too much fuel up a straw, it can get clogged, and that can cause combustion issues. It can cause drowning of wicks. It can cause giant mushrooms. There's all sorts of things. So the idea is to try to find the wicks that tend to work best with your type of wax. And then when you test, you figure out how the oils affect that as well. And then that helps you kind of dial in what specific wick type works best for you in that candle. And then you also just dial in the sizing. So let's see. The next one here is from Callum. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, Callum. But he says, thanks so much for the video. I wanted to ask, what is the relationship between the melt point of a wax and the hot throw? If a wax is a higher melt point and therefore needs a bigger, hotter wick, does that imply stronger hot throw? So this is a really good question because he's thinking about this in the right way. We all know that melt pool affects hot throw, and we also know that different waxes, because of their melt point, might require a different wick. And so I think his question is, if you're using a wax that has a high melt point and you have to use a hotter burning wick for that high melt point, does that mean you're going to have better hot throw? That logical connection makes sense, but that's not necessarily true. You need a hotter burning wick just to get a wax with a high melt point to melt. For the most part, your hot throw is coming from the melt pool. And so if you're not getting a melt pool, then you're not going to get hot throw. And if you're not getting a good enough or hot enough melt pool, you're not going to get a good hot throw. So it's not so much that the fact that you're wicking up or down in size because of your melt point of your wax is what's directly causing the hot throw. It's the fact that you just need that to generate a melt pool, the proper melt pool to give you hot throw. So I hope that was, I felt like that's kind of a weird circular answer, but hopefully that made sense. If not, I'll try to address it a little bit more. And just if you need more sentences on that, then I'll try to address it. But the short answer is the thing that has the biggest impact on your hot throw is your wax type and the melt pool. So you need a wax that throws fragrance fairly well. You need quality oils, and then you need a melt pool. And that's really it. As long as your wick is generating a nice, good hot melt pool, then you're going to get good hot throw. So the melt point of your wax isn't really an indicator necessarily of how good it can throw. There are low melt point paraffin waxes and high melt point paraffin waxes, and almost all paraffin waxes throw really well. And there again are higher melt point soy blends and lower melt point soy blends, and they can both throw fragrance fairly well. So it's not about the melt point of the wax. It's about getting a proper wick and wick size to generate a good melt pool for your wax. So the next question from EAH Weekly 1 is about sales tax. They said, I've been trying to find out more about sales tax. When you pay sales tax for supplies, then pay sales tax quarterly, you end up paying the sales tax twice. How is this compensated? They're just really wanting some information on how this works. So what they're referring to here is when you buy your materials from your supplier, if you pay tax on that, sales tax, and then you turn around and create candles from the supplies, and then when you sell your candles, you collect sales tax and then give that to the state. Their concern is that the item and the material is being taxed twice. Well, there's two things we need to address here. The first part is that you're not actually paying sales tax twice. You should never do that. When you are paying your sales tax to the state quarterly, that's not an expense to you. You're not paying that tax again. You're collecting that from your customers, and then you're just the middleman passing it to the state. That's all you're doing. So you're never paying it twice individually. If you paid sales tax when you bought your supplies, that would be the one time you paid it. And then when you collect it from your customer when you sell a candle and then deliver to that state, you're not paying it again. You're just transferring it for the customer, if that makes sense. The second part of this is you really shouldn't be paying sales tax when you buy your supplies. And that is because you should be tax exempt because you're creating a product from those materials that then you do sell and collect sales tax on. And so that is the situation where you're not necessarily paying the sales tax twice, but the same materials are being taxed twice. They're getting paid, the tax is getting paid by different entities both times, by different people, but the items themselves are still being taxed twice if you're doing that. So what you should be doing is try to be tax exempt. Most of your suppliers are going to sell you your materials with no tax because they know they are a distributor of supplies, like a wholesaler to companies. They know are using those materials to create final products, which they in turn sell and collect sales tax. So most don't charge sales tax to you. There are certain exceptions to this. Certain states, California, I believe, is one of them, that because Candle Science, for example, is based in California, you have to collect sales tax anytime you sell anything within your own state. It's a state-by-state rule. So I'm not a tax expert here, and so you'll have to check with each state, each supplier. But for the most part, suppliers don't charge sales tax. Usually all you got to do is tell them, look, I'm a business. Sometimes they want proof that that you have a sales tax license or something like that. You just have to talk to the suppliers. But I don't pay sales tax on any of my supplies. And so the only sales tax getting paid at all is by the customers when they buy a candle from me. And then I just pass that to the state. So that's how it's supposed to work. If you have any more questions on this also, and I'll try to help you out. I might need to know a little bit more about your situation. So I'll try to help you if you need further assistance on that. The next question is from Christina H. She asks, how do different fragrance oils affect candles? Can they discolor the wax like what happens in soap? Well, working backwards, yes, they can discolor the wax, especially oils that are higher in vanillin. It's kind of a different process and reaction in soap than it is candles. But yes, it can change the color of the wax. As far as how do different fragrance oils affect candles, I'm not sure what specifically you mean, but fragrance oils all are unique. They're all made differently. And so each of them can vary and have a little bit different effect. They can definitely have an effect on wicking. And so anytime you use a different oil, you should test that candle like it's an entirely new product. You can start with similar candles, like the same wax and same jar, and use that as your starting point for your wick, but then be prepared to adjust. Fragrance can have a big impact on wicking. As far as outside of wicking, what other effect can they have on the candles? slight changes of color. So if you're someone who does not use dyes in your candles and you only use natural colored candles, you'll notice that some of your candles don't quite look the same. They're not all the same natural white color or natural ivory color because of the fragrance oil. If you dye your candles, you don't notice it as much because you're dyeing them anyways and you're coming up with the color you want. So that's another way that it can affect them. But other than that, just, affects the way the candles smell. So that's the biggest thing is wicking and color. If it can affect the density and the weight of the candle too, but usually it's a very small or almost negligible, just because there's not huge differences in the density of oils. And by the time that only 8 to 9% or so of your candle is the oil, then it becomes pretty much a negligible factor there. So it's mostly about wicking and color, I would say. All right, so I wanted to keep this short and sweet, so I didn't talk too long and too much and take up too much of your time, but I did want to grab, 5 to 10 of those questions that I saw on that Thanksgiving video and answer those the best as I could right now. I want to keep doing these, so basically what I'm going to ask every time I post a video at the end, go ahead and leave some comments in the comment section below the video. And beyond any comments you have specific to this video, also feel free to go ahead and ask additional questions, and I will address those on the next Q&A video. So this will be something we do pretty recurring. Now, don't worry if I do address your question in one of these Q&A videos. That doesn't mean that's the end of it. Most of these questions require more in-depth discussion, and so most of them will warrant a video just specifically on them. And so we can dive a little bit deeper into those questions, but I like to be able to at least give some kind of quick answer, kind of start getting the discussion going. And some of these questions can be answered fairly quickly and easily, and so they don't necessarily require their own 10 to 15 minute video. But either way, I'll stop talking now. I just please throw more questions at me anytime you want. That's what I'm trying to get at. Ask questions and I'll do my best to answer them as soon as I can. So hopefully you got a little bit of value out of this video. Again, thank you very much for being here and subscribing. Subscribe if you haven't already, all the normal stuff we always say, all the normal jargon. So anyways, have a good rest of the day, night, weekend, whenever this gets posted, and we will see you next time. Thanks everyone. Bye.